Okay, here's one of our last video recordings I'm going to be making for this semester. Again, it looks like I'll be perhaps using these in the fall of 2020, but right now it is spring semester 2020, and I will be talking about our final introduction to government final paper. I've already posted a video talking about the prompt that is all up, and then this is going to be due. One second. This paper is due Tuesday for this class, and it'll be probably different for the next class, 5/12, which is a Tuesday. Online submission in a Word document. Yeah, so this is me just basically talking about, in a short way, kind of how we should be writing these papers. And on Canvas, you will see this document. Let's see if it'll move. Which is what we would have gone over in class. I would have handed this out to everyone, and what you have essentially is a bad paragraph that unfortunately is compiled from my years' experience teaching of what I have seen from students, believe it or not, and then something that is a little more acceptable. And so that's the purpose of this video. And so I'll try and download another video for you all. But when we're writing these papers in terms of clarity, one of the things that I follow coming from the UC system is this idea of the taxes formula. You can look this up. Maybe I'll get it up for you. It's not a big deal. This isn't a writing class. It's just this final requirement we have to do. And so taxes, basically like paying your taxes, is T. It's an acronym, right? So the T stands for topic. So whatever paragraphs you end up doing, you should organize your papers around the four sections I have in the prompt. So you already have the topics and things there, but the T is topic. And so whatever you're talking about, whether it's what your amendment is, whether it's the problem your amendment will be addressing, whether it's how amendments get adopted, and then finally whether it's problems with your potential amendment, those are all different topics, and so they all deserve their own paragraphs. And so each paragraph should have essentially its own topic or what it's about, right? Then the A is essentially the argument, and the argument that you all are making in this paper is that there is one problem, which it could be universal health care, where people get sick and they can't afford to go to the doctors. It could be for more or less gun control. The problem could be for abortion rights or no abortion rights. And so again, like I don't care what you all think, but in a good way. And so the main thing to take away from this writing discussion is you're not trying to convince me of anything. I'm much more interested, even if you're not the best writers, how you go about your logic. This is a skill that I think that is just missing in higher education. And too many professors just want to hear about people's opinions and opinions that they agree with. I don't care. I want to know if you can actually reason, which is why I have that fourth section in our paper prompt. So that's the argument, right? So you basically have these kind of baked in arguments in the paper, which is one, essentially, that there's a problem that you're going to kind of convince me of in a kind of common sense way without using outside information. So again, like the fact that people die from gun violence, I know that. You don't have to convince me, right? So that's what I mean when you kind of think about making your topics just kind of common sense kind of topics. And then two, the second argument is how whatever your amendment is going to solve that problem, right? So there's no for sure answers. You might believe it to be true, but there's no way you can prove it. People write dissertations and do policy work to try and produce evidence that some of these things will have fixes. But hopefully by this point in the class, you've picked up on the way that I've taught things, and that usually there's just no easy answers. And then on top of there being no easy answers, you get into social media, social pressures, people disagreeing, and then the radical forms of that, right? So even in many of the things I've seen, many of you are very passionate, but your passion blinds you to perhaps the actual arguments on the ground. So that's what I'm trying to force you all to do in this paper. So I want to make sure you can articulate the arguments and explain why you believe something to be the case. So this isn't really a subjective paper in terms of your opinion. It's subjective in terms of your ability to argue. I'll go through this quickly. So then we get to the X. The X is weird. It actually stands for example, so it should be an E. So examples are basically things that you're going to rely on to prove your argument or support your argument. So it's already, again, baked in. And so think about empirical things in the world. Again, you shouldn't have to rely on outside information. If you need to, you should email me, and we can go over it to make sure it's a valid source and You're not citing Vox or Fox News or something like that. Um, but yeah, like you want to have these examples that you can point to. People dying from not having health care, pretty obvious. Gun deaths, having access or not having access to abortion. Like I can get these things. And again, you don't have to have these kind of important topics. I think I said in the other video, you can just say like, hey, I think the president should only be president for 2 years. So maybe two-year terms. And explain it to me. Again, like maybe we should have 11 Supreme Court justices. Maybe we should have more than 435 members of the House of Representatives. Like you might use this. You can have procedural changes to the Constitution. It doesn't have to be like some fix-all. Like, oh, we're going to get rid of global warming. Like that's a problem, but maybe it's just outside of the scope of American law to legislate, right? Because that would depend on with global warming, other countries following rules, and they're not going to follow the American Constitution, right? So really think, and that might actually go into your section 4. Really think about what some of your examples are. So then the E after the X, there are the examples, is your explanation. So basically, then you're just explaining in layman's terms, layperson terms, what your example means and why it basically supports it to be the case, right? So in some sense, if it's like, well, people dying is a problem, well, explain it to me. Like, don't assume I understand. You guys all know I'm an idiot. Treat me like one. Less people dying means that there's, the economy's stronger because there's more people working. Like, again, take the time to explain it. And then the S is going to be significance. And so the significance is relevant with regards to why you're talking about it in terms of the paper, right? So you're basically tying in your discussion to the prompts of the paper. Why is it significant you're talking about people dying? Or why is it significant you're talking about saving taxpayers' dollars? Because it's going to help solve the problem that your amendment was meant to solve, right? And so that's always going to be the significance, is tying it back into the purpose of this paper. This is an English paper. It's going to be a little disjointed. Some of you are probably going to struggle with what's my thesis statement or what's the paper about? You want to just reiterate the prompts. The paper is about the prompts, and so you want to usually write the prompts in your own words, and that's what your conclusion will be as well, which is in the prompt, which is like you're going to restate all the things you went through, right? So again, it's basically there's some problem, and you're going to explain it to me using examples and things like that. The second part is, okay, you're going to have an amendment. Explain to me how it solves that problem, right? Number 4 then is how amendments get adopted from Section 2 of the Chapter 2 of the American Government Book. So walk me through it briefly in your own words, how amendments get adopted into the U.S. Constitution. It's different than laws. Sometimes students will tell me how a law gets adopted, so how a bill becomes a law. That's wrong. It's different. You have to do the readings. Don't just use Wikipedia. No, some of you are going to use Wikipedia. Read the book. Cite the book. So I want direct citations in that section, Section 3. And then Section 4, again, is going to be what are some problems with your proposal. Or, again, if you say your proposal is perfect, if you're a brilliant legal mind, even though a lot of us probably aren't lawyers yet, if you just know it'll work, then give me a reason why it's going to work. And again, that's unlikely, right? Because nothing you do in politics is going to be uncontroversial. If I said I'm going to give everyone free money, someone would complain, right? It doesn't matter what you do, there's always going to be pushback. That's just human nature. So with that little review of the paper prompts, I just want to go in terms of like things you should not do with regards to the readings. So I'm going to read this paragraph quickly. It's meant to be bad. So these are common problems you have as students. Which you'll notice, for one, if we did this in class, I would have you essentially tell me all the mistakes in groups, right? Is that the font is incorrect. So you want to make sure you're writing in Times New Roman. It's also too big, right? Also, the spacing in between the sentences is too large as well. It's not double spaced. So again, people try and cheat. They try and get past the page limit. But each page, if you're doing 12 font Times New Roman inch margins, which is what you all need to do, each page in that format is usually 330 words. The reason why professors are so sticklers with regards to these criteria is that it ensures everyone's writing an equal amount, right? So again, the easiest thing you can do in any class, and every professor rolls their eyes, is when you don't follow the correct font because the font sizes change, and you do little things like this to try and make your papers longer. Because you'll go, Professor, it's 6 pages, but then we go, yeah, but if you do this, this, and this, it's going to make it 5.5. So you didn't meet the limit, right? So you're just wasting your time. So many of us do that. It's a thing, a bad habit from high school. You're wasting your time. I've been grading so many papers, I can make the adjustment in my head. So make sure you're following the format correctly. So we have here injustice. That's wrong. That's a fragment sentence. And you don't need a hook. You just want to start your introduction paragraphs what the paper's about, which we'll see in the next paragraph. America is full of it. Uh, from racial discrimination to the lack of economic equality, the U.S. does a really bad job at fixing the problems we all want improved. And so from the beginning, you can tell the writing is disjointed, and you don't really know what the writer is talking about, right? It's very vague. Maybe it has something to do with racial discrimination. Maybe it has something to do with economic inequality. And then it's very informal. So we see here a really bad job at fixing. First of all, you don't fix a problem. It's not like fixing a sink. So you really all need to think about the words you're using, and you want to be formal, right? Fixing the problems we all want improved. We all want the same problems improved. Again, this is what I mean by the logic. Think about the logic that you want. It's a problem that you're talking about, but again, if you think there's gun violence and I happen to be pro Second Amendment, I don't see a problem, right? So don't speak in these colloquial ways and don't assume everyone agrees with you. You know they don't. You know I don't. So don't write that way. Don't get me wrong. There, and that's the wrong there, are a lot of good things in America, but there, wrong there, are just so many problems politicians never deal with, like immigration reform and providing universal health care and not invading countries. So again, as the writer, I have just given you one that's horrible run-on sentences. So run-on sentences are when you have multiple ideas in a sentence. You need to have a period, or you need to have some punctuation. That's what critique or that thing you get from professors is run-on sentence. So some sentences, much like paragraphs, need to express one much more simple idea than, say, a paragraph. A paragraph might be a more general idea. And again, now we have politicians not dealing with stuff like immigration reform. And so the main problem with this as an introduction paragraph is like, you just don't know what I'm talking about, right? So the hook isn't trying to catch the reader's attention. This isn't an English paper or creative writing. It's very cold and calculating. You just restate what the prompts are about. And so here again, I don't know what this paper is about. The person, which is me obviously, has introduced 5 or 6 more new ideas. So how can we fix it? Never use rhetorical questions. So just that, again, it's a problem with formal writing. You don't have questions in this regard. Now, can you use questions and rhetorical questions? Yeah, but we're not at that level. I'm at that level. You folks are not at that level yet. So just avoid this altogether. Also, a lot of you have a tendency to use a lot of semicolons. I would say just don't use any semicolons. It's tricky. I don't know the rules of semicolons, so I doubt many of you do. If you do, you may use them, but I think it's a bad way of having run-on sentences. So I would say avoid semicolons. One way we can deal with these problems is through adding a, so again, we're not writing, our grammar is incorrect here, an amendment, I should say, to the Constitution. And generally, I would capitalize Constitution because it's referring to the American context, this American document, its name, the U.S. Constitution. Other countries can have constitutions, but I would say the correct grammar there is to capitalize that. I won't mark you down if you don't. My amendment will say that America needs better equality. Again, it's so vague. Like, what does that mean? Like we all need to be the same height. We all need to be the same weight. You all might use these words like freedom, democracy, and equality as if I know what you're talking about, but I don't. And so this person, which is me, has written this thing about we need more equality, like more money equality. What does that mean? Don't be romantic. Don't assume I know what you're talking about. Be very, very specific. For everyone, there you have a sentence fragment, right? It doesn't have a subject and predicate. The Constitution was written back in the day. So again, these are colloquialisms. When I say colloquialisms, it means like common turns of phrase. Like a grip or a ton, ways of expressing certain things. This is informal. You want to actually write in a formal way. You don't want to rely on like common parlance or the common ways in which we speak to each other. Writing has to be formal so that we don't have ambiguity, right? So why? Written back in the day, like what, a day ago? The back, what's the back of a day? Like back seems to refer to location, not temporal time, right? So that's just a terrible way of writing. So you would say the Constitution was written far enough into the past where adding to it can fix today's problems or something like that, right? So that's what I mean. It's a muscle. Writing is difficult, but once you start figuring out these tricks, it becomes a little easier. Again, I struggle with it. I'm working on my dissertation. I'm not the world's best writer. Sure, we have our friendly Charles Norris here defending America, as you would expect. And so this is a paragraph for as an intro. Again, these are both supposed to be examples of intro paragraphs that I think is a little bit better, a little stronger. Again, I've had students tear this apart too. Again, it's definitely, I think no one could disagree that it's not, this is better than the last paragraph, but could it be better? Absolutely. Can any of you attain this level of writing? Absolutely, if you take your time. Okay. For many Americans, food insecurity is a serious concern that not only undermines their ability to participate politically, but oftentimes undermines their lives as well. So it's right off the bat, you know what this paper is basically about. It must have something to do with food insecurity, right? So then what should you do? You define what food insecurity is. Right? So it's almost like I wrote this. We can understand food insecurity to mean the lack of resources or ability required to obtain an amount of nutrition necessary in having a healthy and productive life. Okay, and so now I don't leave it to the reader to assume they know what food insecurity means, right? It's like it's not as if there's a food needs a security guard. I'm saying it has to do with not having these resources or not having food. I probably could have actually just said not having food. It might have been a better way of writing that. So then we know what the paper prompt's about, given the prompt that you all have. So one way to attempt to address this issue in the United States, being specific, is through a constitutional amendment. This paper, right, the paper, so we know we're writing a paper, so be literal, discusses proposing a new amendment to the U.S. Constitution to remedy food insecurity in the United States. So yeah, I could have just put proposes a new amendment, but for what? So you have to add to remedy food insecurity, so you're always being specific, so the reader never gets lost in what you're saying. And then basically, once you have established your introduction, which is this, you want to just basically go over or set the roadmap of what the paper will be about. So in any introduction you produce in college, the reader should know exactly how the paper should go from reading the first one or two paragraphs from your introduction, right? Obviously for us, we're trying to be as concise as possible, so we want it to be in the first paragraph out of the way. Copy this. Don't copy it word for word, but this is what I want your intro paragraphs to be like. So if you reread yours and it's not like this, then you should just start over, right? Make it as close to this as possible. So then what you'll notice from here on, right, I basically just go through the prompt. There's no science here. I just tell you the answers to the prompt, right? And I go what I will talk about in the paper. And it's okay to use the first person. I don't care. It's a weird thing from high school that you're not supposed to use the first person. Again, I think it avoids bad habits, but now that we're all college thinkers, it's not a bad habit if you don't let it become one. First, I discuss food insecurity and why it is a problem that requires a constitutional amendment, right? So I'm just literally restating the first part of the prompt. The second part of the prompt, I present my constitutional amendment and explain what it means in greater detail. So obviously I cannot write everything about the paper here, but I'm giving you a general overview of what that section will be about. This section will elucidate, it's a fancy word, always use your thesaurus in a paper, right? Will elucidate how many, so it means bring to light, how my amendment solves the problem of food insecurity. So again, I'm reminding the reader what we're talking about. Next, I provide a brief summary explaining the political process involved in getting an amendment adopted in the U.S. Finally, I discuss a few problems with my proposal, which include both constitutional problems and the likely consequences from its adoption. So what you'll notice is I just go through the aspects of the prompt. So that's the way I want everyone to write. It is difficult, it is challenging, but you are all more than capable of doing this. For some of us, it takes work. For some of us, we may not have come from the best high schools. I didn't come from a good high school. Moving into college, it took me a long time to just be able to write, coherently. Yeah, so again, this weird kind of coronavirus time, you have sort of time on your hands. Maybe some of you are working more or less. I will be holding a Zoom session this week. I think for us, I said it was Wednesday, which is the 6th, May 6th at 1 p.m. The link is already in the announcements as of the publication of this video. So if you have any paper writing questions, if you have any class questions, I'll have a Zoom session. It's not required, but you're welcome to jump on. I'll probably have a Zoom session next week as we approach getting our last notes together for the final. And then I will have another video on the final notes and review. Maybe that'll even be a Zoom session I can record for people who don't want to be part of that Zoom session. And so you will have tips and tricks to passing the final video, things to note. But again, I won't go through things in depth. We should be reading. We should be asking questions. So again, I hope everyone's well. I hope this is making some sense, and I'll get this up as soon as my computer compiles it and YouTube lets me post it. So keep in touch, email me, and you guys have a good rest of your night.